Hi, Dr. Biology here, and welcome to my greatest biologists. So this time I'm going to look at Rosalind Franklin. She made some really important discoveries that helped Watson and Crick and others to discover the structure of DNA. It's quite an important story that I tell you about Rosalind Franklin, as she really didn't get the praise that she should have done at the time. So I think it's only right to tell you a bit more about what she did, what she discovered, and her role in probably the most important discovery of the 20th century.
Number 1. Franklin was born in Notting Hill in London in 1920, and she attended St Paul's Girls' School, which was one of the few institutions at the time that taught physics and chemistry to girls. Indeed, by 15, Franklin knew that she wanted to be a scientist, in spite of her father actively discouraging her due to the difficulties of women having such a career at the time. Nevertheless, she went on to study chemistry at Newnham College at Cambridge University. After a degree in 1947, she then travelled to Paris and became an X-ray crystallographer. That's a technique used to determine the atomic and molecular structure of a crystal by measuring the angles and intensities of diffracted X-ray beams. So this has been used to study the structure of inorganic and organic materials, and it's still even used today in developing new chemical active ingredients. And then in 1951, she managed to get a scholarship to King's College London. This was where her X-ray diffraction studies really developed at that time, as she studied proteins, and proteins are a product of DNA. Number 2. With her work at King's College, she worked also with Maurice Wilkins, who was the assistant director of the King's Biophysics Lab, and he secured some funding to look at the DNA of a calf's thymus, and Franklin's team carried out the crystallographic studies of this DNA. And using X-ray equipment and microcamera film, Franklin and a graduate student called Raymond Gosling, they photographed and analysed these samples of DNA. They took this groundbreaking photo. Now, to you, this might not look very much, but this is this is photo 51, which provided the clearest diffraction image of DNA and its helical pattern so far at this point. Now, she even wrote in her notes, if you look very carefully, this is Rosalind Franklin's notes, and she actually did write helix. So she realised that the structure of the photograph that she'd taken, that the arrangement involved a twist and therefore a helix. Now, you have to remember, this is before Watson and Crick's discovery in 1953. This is in May 1952. Number 3. Now, Franklin worked in the team with Maurice Wilkins. Now, Maurice Wilkins was quite a well-respected scientist at this time. He'd done a lot of work in World War II. He'd been part of the Manhattan Project, but he did become disillusioned with nuclear physics and got into biophysics. It was Wilkins' idea initially, though, to study DNA by X-ray crystallographic techniques, and he'd already began to implement it before Franklin was appointed. However, it is really quite well documented that, unfortunately, Wilkins and Franklin, they did not get on very well at the time when they worked together, and this probably did slow the progress. Wilkins shared the photo 51 without Franklin knowing that had been shared to Crick and Watson at Cambridge University. And the fact is, Franklin and also Gosling, who she was working with, were working on the double helix model themselves. But by the time they published the findings in July 1953, Crick and Watson had already stunned the science world. On the right, you can see a famous picture of the structure, the double helix structure of DNA. That's the original model that they made, both Watson and Crick, in 1953. When Watson saw the photograph for the first time, he said, "My jaw fell open and my pulse began to race." And they published in 1953, and they included a footnote acknowledging that they were stimulated by general knowledge of Franklin's and Wilklin's unpublished contribution, when in fact much of their work was rooted in Franklin's photo and finding. In 1962, Crick, Watson and Wilkins were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, and this was for their discoveries concerning the molecular structure of nucleic acids and its significance for information transfer in living material. So why, do you ask, why didn't Rosalind Franklin get the Nobel Prize? Well, unfortunately, in the autumn of 1956, Franklin discovered that she had ovarian cancer. She continued to work throughout the following 2 years, despite having 3 operations and experimental chemotherapy. And she worked for several weeks until before her death. And her death on April the 16th, 1958, at the age of 37. Unfortunately, the Nobel Prizes are not given posthumously, so that is why she did not get the prize. It's important to state that Watson and Crick were thankful for that material, because in Watson's memoir called The Double Helix, he did acknowledge that they used Franklin's data without her permission. But for her part, Franklin did not express bitterness about the issue and readily accepted their model. In fact, she later befriended Crick and his wife. So whilst at the time probably Rosalind Franklin had been forgotten about, I think these days now most scientists, if not all scientists, realise the importance of her work. And if she had been alive, she definitely would have been awarded a Nobel Prize for her work. Her work has definitely secured her scientific immortality. Without her passion to research, we may not have made the huge strides in science and medicine that we have witnessed since that great discovery.